So this month we are doing active shooter, and I'm going to tell you this is not my area of forte by any means. I pretend to know nothing, and I like it that way when it comes to active shooter and mass casualties. So if you have things to say, you would like to engage in the participation today, that would be wonderful. I would greatly appreciate it. So we have a couple videos. This this was put together by Pat Leahy and Nick Tomesco from Wheeling Fire Department. Both of them are doing a lot with working with active shooter. They've been taking a lot of different classes and really working on putting a good plan together. Oops. It's supposed to be somewhere else right now. So, all right. So what's fairly interesting about that is that there was a lot of those that I didn't even recognize when Pat and Nick were doing their presentation for us. And I really think that it's kind of turning into a bad thing because it almost is like getting to be the norm. And people are constantly saying it's not if it happens to us, it's when it's going to happen to us. And so I was just blown away by, well, to be very honest with you, this presentation is about 50 slides and nothing but active shooter pictures. So it'll go fairly quickly. But it's interesting to see how many of those I didn't even know about, that I had not heard about on the news. And it is just one of those things that is becoming almost an everyday occurrence we're seeing. Some of the statistics that are there are very old statistics. So, the latest they have is like 2017, I think it was. So, when we go ahead and we talk about, and you guys have been through so much training, I'm sure, of active shooter. I know Kim is working very hard to get your mass casualty bags and your emergency management plans all up to date. And we're doing the right thing. We're really working hard to make sure we have these plans that are going to be successful when the time comes. But one of the things that we don't think a lot about when we do these plans is what happens to us? What happens to you after one of these incidences? How well are you emotionally and mentally prepared for one of these situations? So the references that they used were the Grit Under Fire, Mavis 3 SOPs. If you haven't seen Dave Grossman, personally myself, I haven't, but I've heard a lot of people rave about him and his lectures on mass casualty type situations. So if you ever get a chance to go to one of his lectures, it would, I guess he's spectacular. So in the end, it's not about the hardware, it's about the software. Amateurs talk about hardware or equipment. Professionals talk about software or training and mental readiness. How many times do you guys call in another fire department because your ambulances are out? And they pull up in front. And most of your residents don't say, oh, this is an Evanston, we don't want to go with them. You know, it's an ambulance, they call for help. And it doesn't really matter whose name is on the side of the box, it's someone that's there to help them. And when we go ahead and we talk about the planning of this, you know, there's a lot of different equipment that goes into play. You know, and as long as somebody is there, as long as the plans are in place, but how about how does your crew perform? How are they going to handle the situation? Are they not only mentally ready, are they physically ready to be able to handle a situation like this? When we do paramedic school every year, we do things over and over again. We practice like we play. We do things so that when you guys get really stressed and things start to go awry, that the students then have that muscle memory that they can fall back on, that they actually just do what they're supposed to do. I was actually this morning reading email from one of my students, basically because we're coming down to the end thinking, and he was looking back to the very first time he did CPR in the ICU. And as he was standing there watching everything, and the doctor said, come on, get in here, he said, can I do this, in his own mind? And then he realized that when he started, everything just kind of went into place. His muscles took over, and everything that he had learned up to that point, he was just doing. He wasn't even thinking about it. And that's what we look about with our basic skills. That's why we do the training we do. We have to have common sense. We have to have identify different patterns as we go through this. Now, when we take a look at some of these accidents, like this first one up here, some of you might think, oh, pretty good car accident. We don't see people getting hurt as much as what we used to. So with some of these pictures up here, we just kind of go about, and some of us think it's pretty cool. Some of you guys that have never been in a real fire yet, if you're new to fire and EMS, some of you maybe never been anything, and you're probably thinking, oh, this is great, I'm so excited, I got my first fire. But what happens at the end when you're going through the house and you have to pull 3 young children out of that house because there was no working smoke detectors? How does that make you feel? Are you upset? Are you angry? Are we ready for a situation where we have to walk through the schools and work with police officers to go ahead and help those that have been shot, those kids that have been shot, or even adults for that matter? So we go through so many things, and in these types of situations, they're very high stress. Stress for us can be a good thing to some degree. I mean, we all function a little bit better with some stress in our lives. But where does it come to the point where it's too much stress? Is everything in disarray? Is it that we don't know what's really going to happen? What's around that corner? Is that gunman around the corner? How many of you actually think before you go into any type of situation, am I going to come out of this alive? Is there harm there? Or should I not do it? A lot of times, you know, when you're fighting a fire, yeah, there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but you've trained for it. You know how to handle it. And so you don't a lot of times think about, am I going to be harmed? How our body handles stress and how the sympathetic nervous system kind of takes over You can see here that we have approximately 60 beats per minute is our normal resting heart rate. But as our heart rate goes up, different things start to go ahead and happen to our bodies. We start off with getting fine motor skill deterioration. I always tell my students, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If your adrenaline goes haywire and you're all excited about that first cardiac arrest that you're doing, and you start trying to rush, how many times have you dropped the IV stuff when you're trying to put it together? Or you're trying to get that tube and you can't get it because your hands are shaking so bad. It's a matter of us taking a deep breath and trying to calm ourselves down a little bit, reduce our heart rates maybe a little bit, do some of that tactical breathing that you guys have been trained to do. And then hopefully our fine motor skills will start functioning. We get a little bit higher. And then we have our complex motor skills. Higher than that, we have we have tunnel vision. Auditory noises just becomes a blur to us. We have cognitive processing that starts to deteriorate. And then we get to the point where it's just all over. Everything kind of dumps on us. We freeze. We, to the point where we lose control of our bladder, hence the term. Someone scared the crap out of me. You know, we lose control of our bladder or our bowels. Here's just another same type of slide, exactly showing different things with the heart rate. But we know, Chief Kirschoffer from Newport Fire Department many years ago did a lot of different types of studies with firefighters and how their body temperatures start to rise, and how their heart rate rise, and how they can't do simple types of skills, or even simple walking. And we see that when we get that high stress. When we look at this one, condition red is actually kind of the optimal. When you're looking between red and yellow here, that's a good stress. That's the stress that really helps us, kind of kicks us a little bit, gets us moving, has that muscle memory that starts to go ahead and kick in. So it said there white was normal, yellow we're ready to go, we're prepared, we understand what's happening. In the red zone, optimal performance. We have good gross motor skill sets, good visual reaction time. But once we head over the top of that bell curve, we hit that gray and that black area, things go downhill from there. We get tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, loss of cognitive processing. And then we can actually end up having that breakdown mentally. So I'm going to show you another video. I want you to watch this video.
Writing's not that easy, but hopefully it can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read. It undermines the writer's message, and the word choice is bland. Grammarly's cutting-edge technology helps you craft compelling
So with that video, a lot of stress there. What are some of the things that we just talked about that you saw? Guy had auditory exclusion, right? You know, he saw everything that was going on. His stress level was through the roof, and he was watching everything but couldn't hear anything. He had a moment of tunnel vision where he froze. You know, people were very, you know, there was breakdown. The one kid that was curled up didn't know what to do. He just mentally and physically broke down. Think about any time where you've been doing the job, where you've been in such a stressful situation that you yourself have had that moment where you froze just for a second, or you just kind of watch things unravel around you. So there's different groups that are out there, and how we deal with the stresses of the jobs that we do is really important. We'll never make it through this job if we don't somehow find a good way to deal with this. There's different Firefighter Support Alliance. There's the Illinois Firefighter Peer Association group. Both are really good. As a matter of fact, the Peer Association group that they have here, Tom Howard is part of it. He comes and talks to my students about stress and how to handle it. And this year I had 3 of my students that literally called this hotline to go ahead and work. I had one student who, he's been a firefighter, he's young, and he went through an Explorer program, not here, so not yours. But he was in the ER, and there was a very combative patient, and he got caught up in the moment where he should not have been, and he literally took the patient and slammed him down on the cot and started screaming inches away from his face. And when I talked to him about it, he had to be pulled off by a nurse. And when I talked to him, he didn't remember anything of the incident. And I said, first of all, you have to learn to deal with your anger issues. You have to learn how to handle the stress that you're getting. And so I reached out to Tom Howard and I said, hey, would you mind talking to this student? And he sat down and he discussed things with him. And the student actually called back a couple more times. Paramedic school is very stressful. It's not like when a lot of us went where you had one book and you kind of floated through. It's extremely stressful and time consuming now compared to what it used to be. And so these are really good organizations that you can reach out. Yes, you can go ahead and go to a physician and you have employee support groups, or you can reach out to peers who have been doing the same thing you did to be able to help out. So today, some of the things that we're going to kind of go through is the function of a rescue task force member, going through and understanding how we're going to treat these patients, the formations, the movement techniques, different collection points, and then how do we get them out of there? How do we move them through the situation? So with the Boston Marathon, this was a big incident. If you look, 3 killed, 264 injured. Now, if anybody has ever worked down in the Chicago Marathon and helped volunteer, they have medical first aid tents right at the start and finish of the event. And then they have different aid stations that are around the route. The ones that are at the start and finish line, they actually do have a lot of medical personnel right there ready to go. But when you're looking through this, when it first initially happened, there's no medical personnel there. Who do these people rely on but each other? They actually start helping out. Those that are not injured, a lot of times in situations, you're going to see them. You see this guy here. He's, talking to someone. He's trying to direct them. And you see all these injured people standing there. And you've got other people that are trying to go ahead and help those that are right next to them. I should have given you a warning. Some of these are pretty graphic. Here, you've got 2 men trying to go ahead and stabilize this guy's leg. In these pictures, we see nobody with the yellow vest on. We see nobody at this point in time. So this is really important to understand that by the time you arrive, a lot of things may have already been started. People are going to direct you, or may be able to direct you to who is some of the more critical patients. Finally, we see fire, EMS, medical personnel start to go ahead and get into the scene and start helping people. Who do we go to first? You go back to this very first scene here. Who gets triaged first? Who do we pick? These people have already picked the person next to them. But when we walk in the doors, who do we go to first? It's the first person we come to. And we do a quick triage of them. Just a quick 30 seconds, designating what, red, yellow, or green, okay? Determining where they might, kind of fall. We're not doing any major treatments. We might want to, if we have a tourniquet on us, give them a tourniquet, stops the major bleeding. But other than that, then we move on fairly quickly. Here's this guy again. They were tying up this guy's leg, and they were using whatever they could to go ahead and put tourniquets on. That's probably one of the areas where the Boston Fire Chief, he came and did a lecture for Region 10 at our trauma symposiums that we used to have a couple of years ago. And he said one of the things we found is that we don't have enough tourniquets on all of our rigs. And that was just really when they started changing the whole process. Remember how we went through doing direct pressure. If direct pressure didn't work, we did elevation, then pressure points. And tourniquets were last resorts. Things have changed now, and this was just the time that we were switching over that if direct pressure didn't help, then we went straight to a tourniquet. Trying to get these patients moved out of there. They credit the survival of all these patients due to the fact that they were able to move them out of there fairly quickly and to get them to care as soon as possible. Transportation was set up. And honestly, if you've ever watched the Chicago Marathon or ever been down there for it, you will see ambulances just all over the place. I had just got the plan for Superior. Superior does a lot of the running for ambulances down there with Chicago Fire. But they have hundreds of ambulances that are all over that route down there, scattered, both at the start, finish, and throughout. So they're able to transport these patients. Yeah, a doctor of Boston area hospital said rescuers immediately turned and did medical techniques. They got devices that would save lives, and then they used, belts, shirts, materials, but they really worked hard to get them out of there. And that's what they attribute to as many people surviving, why there wasn't as many deaths as what there could have been for these patients. So this is the slide I told you that was a little bit older, and there's some more information. I think some of you guys might have realized that there's like an active shooter. I think last week they told me somewhat one a day, an active shooter type situation. Pat and Nick had stated that with this is the only slide that they could find or graph that they could find up till that point in time. But these are just audios of the instances, and there's no real video attached to them. But listening to the chaos that occurred out in Vegas and Parkland Formula, and even Aurora down in Illinois here. But if you take a look, 2001 active shooter incident, all the way up in 2017, 30, and there's so many more of that now going on. These incidents are going on everywhere. We think as a hospital that it's not going to happen to us. Was it Del Mar Hospital, Mercy Hospital? I can't remember, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, where the significant other or ex wanted to go ahead and he started shooting up the hospital down there. 40% of the active shooters are going to happen in businesses, 29% in school, others are outdoors or even in other areas. We had the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, 6 killed, 4 wounded. This is quite a long situation throughout the day. We sat there and were able to listen to it. We never made it there, we were just moved to a different station, but we're a good half hour, I know half hour doesn't seem like a lot to you guys down here, but we were about 30 miles away from the incident where we were. We just did change of quarters, but sat there and listened to it. You had Sandy Hook Elementary School, and like I said, the next 40 slides that we're going to see here are strictly just this. And I will be honest with you, I don't know all the details of all of these shootings, and honestly, I just didn't have the time to go look them all up and see what the situations were. But this was a big one that we heard that was all over the news. And then it's not just guns, it's people with knives, 14 stabbed and slashed in a knife attack. Santa Monica. Unless anybody really wants to look at the pictures in great detail, I'm going to probably just kind of click through these a little bit. But these are the reasons why we go ahead and train. You know, there's so many of them, whether you've got a great deal of people being shot or if it's just a couple being shot. Here, 16-year-old stabbed and slashed 20 students. 3 stabbed to death, 3 shot, 13 injured out in California. So, none of these incidents, you know, the game plan is kind of the same for all of them, but it's our training that actually goes ahead and helps us set up proper command structure, making sure we have the proper number of ambulances that we need, the proper number of medical personnel that we need for helping these people out, getting them out of the situation. And we'll come to it here shortly, but movie theater shooting, 2 killed, 8 shot. Again, Antioch, Tennessee. I mean, there's so many of these where they just show over and over. And some of these I'm looking at going, sure, some of them have made CNN in the news, but others you don't ever hear about because maybe they're not where there's over 10 people that are shot. And again, we take a look back at that Boston Marathon, no medical personnel. We don't know who's going to be next, but we want to make sure that we're prepared. For us to go ahead and say, oh, we're a small town, and we said this for the longest time. I grew up in Reedsburg, which is by Wisconsin Dells in Wisconsin, and just about 20 miles out of town, there was a small community farm high school, basically. The whole school, from kindergarten to senior in high school, had about 250 students. I mean, that's how small it actually was. And someone came to school and started shooting up. This is about 15 years ago. And we always said, how could this happen? We're a small farming community. We all know each other. We all know our neighborhood. You know, we were in complete denial. But it can happen anywhere. We expect this kind of stuff to happen in bigger cities. You know, you have this one here that happened in Winnetka, the Lauren Dan case. And then you had Northern Illinois University, 5 killed, 17 shot. The thing about all of these is that we think that you guys think that you're going to get there before it's over. It's long over by the time that you get there. Most incidences on average last 5 to 12 minutes, and the police officer's response time is usually 3 to 6 minutes. So by the time they arrive, most of the time, these incidences are completely over. 57% of shooting, the officer arrives while the shooting is still on their way. So that initial officer, most of the time it's not going to be. A lot of times they say 40% of the instances the perpetrator will kill themselves. And 2% of shootings bring other weapons along with them. So this was one of the big cases that, you know, shook the whole United States. And we learned a lot from this, and this is why we have changed our rescue task force protocols, or are working on changing them. They felt that if we could have gotten these students out and gotten treatment to them sooner and got them out sooner, that a lot more would have lived than what did. But they went in and they didn't want to let any fire, EMS, or medical personnel in until they found that active shooter. Now we're doing a lot of training. Do you guys hear, and I can't remember what they told me last week, do you all have your own vests, or do they just have them on the rigs for who's ever on that rig?
On the rig.
Okay. Yeah, most of them, I mean, up by us, it's part of the issue here now, is that you're getting a bulletproof vest and a helmet. And it's a great deal of money that it's causing, but of course, you guys need to be safe. And it's not even in big situations like this. Think about how many times firefighter paramedics have gone to a scene, gone in a house, and didn't know what they were walking into. 12 killed at the Aurora, Colorado. This has been out for actually a couple of years, about 3 years I think it is. Yeah, it's 15. And then it came back around from Homeland Security, First Responder Guide for Improving Survivability for Explosive or Active Shooter Incidences. I just actually got it again, I think earlier this year, and I resent it out to all the fire chiefs. But I started reading some of it, and because I'm trying to educate myself a little bit, and it seemed like there's a lot of good material in here that a lot of the chiefs and people that are working on these different plans are going to start implementing. So what we do is changing. You know, before we used to stand outside, bring the patients to us. We don't go into anywhere that isn't safe. We stand blocks away until we're told we can come near. Law enforcement's really good about making that immediate entry to go ahead and stop the threat. They'll go ahead and start doing their sweep. But what about those that are lying there critically injured? By us doing training with our police officers and putting protocols in place and action plans to be able to go ahead and bring firefighter paramedics in with officers to protect those, to be able to start immediate treatment for some of these patients that have been critically ill. We can go ahead and start stopping that bleeding. There's a lot of classes now. How many of you guys have heard about Stop the Bleed classes? I don't know if you guys have been getting many requests, but a lot of school districts in the area are asking fire departments and those to come out and teach these Stop the Bleed classes for the general public. And so, just so you know, first of all, it's an online class if you ever want to get instructors. I think it's maybe about an hour, 2 hours that you go through to be able to do these Stop the Bleed classes. St. Francis has the mannequins, the legs for packing and how to put tourniquets on them, so if you ever want to borrow those, you're more than welcome to if you have them. And then they have put together small kits. Now here is a region we use some disaster money to go ahead and purchase those kits, and when our hospital goes out, Lavina, the trauma coordinator, she's been doing quite a bit of these Stop the Bleed classes. And so they've been giving these kits out to these areas, but if you guys want, we can also get you the information of how to purchase and order those Stop the Bleed kits. They've got combat gauze in them. Actually, I have one in my car, I'm sorry, but they have combat gauze, tourniquets, scissors, markers, just regular dressings that are very helpful for these kit classes. But they're starting to actually teach even the students so that if there is an active shooter in a school district or in a school, the students are actually trained of how to go ahead and stop generalized bleeding. Practice of the fire department staging until the scene is completely secured. That we found has delayed the treatment for these patients, and so now they're putting people through special classes, rescue task force classes that will teach them how to go ahead and enter the scenes and how to be safe. We need to get that care to these injured as soon as possible. That's why it's important that if you, I think you guys have got some good ones. You did a hazmat one earlier with Northwestern. Don't you have another one planned coming up? I thought here soon.
Next spring is a large active shooter.
Yeah, I've been hearing just bits and pieces of it, so yeah, I just kind of picked up on it.
Early April.
You did one at Lincoln School earlier this year? Yeah, so you guys have been doing your training. What they're trying to do is stop the threat, control the hemorrhage of these critical injured patients, get them extricated to a collection point where these then patients will be taken in and further triage, started further treatment, and then transported to definitive care. That's really what we're looking at. So hot zone obviously is the area where is the most danger. That's where they believe that the shooter may still be. Areas that they haven't necessarily swept yet. TEMS, I don't know. Has anybody ever gone through a TEMS class here? I haven't heard too much about TEMS classes in Illinois. I know that back in Wisconsin they're pretty common up there, but yeah, I know that, gosh, Dr. Sands, he was a doctor a couple of years ago, really wanted to start teaching this throughout the state of Illinois, but it hasn't gotten that far yet. Warm area. This is where you guys will enter with officers. You'll be able to go ahead and provide that life-threatening care to these patients. You know, if they need to go ahead and have an occlusive dressing on a sucking chest wound or stopping bleeding, or even maybe a needle decompression due to a pneumo. Those are different things that we do for life-saving, but we're protected. And then the cold zone, this is where command is. This is where your staging of your ambulances are going to be. Your medical triage is going to take place, your transport. So all of you guys are really familiar with this type of slide. They left it in because we do teach to private ambulance providers and independent who have never ever heard this terminology before, so that they understand if they're ever called to that situation what you guys are talking about. So a couple years ago, the region actually purchased active shooter bags. There was a committee. What bag would be the best? What should we put in these bags for you guys? And we gave one to every single department. Yeah, I think it's just one to every single department originally. A lot of people are starting to go even more in depth with these bags. We had Pat and Nick come to our trauma meeting that we have on a monthly basis with our trauma docs. Because our trauma docs are really against using combat gauze or quick clot to help control some of the bleeding. They really did not have a full understanding of what it was. They were still in the old days where you poured the stuff into the wound and it caused, you know, burning and lots of problems for them when they needed to clean it out. But they showed the 2 chest seals. I actually gave some to the medical officers. I think it was earlier this year what was approved, and then also the combat gauze. What type of bandages are you using? Are you using the Israeli bandage or are you using the Alaris bandage? Do you have other bandages you can use for pressures? Different tourniquets. We, at St. Francis and in Region 10, we will always resupply the cat tourniquet. I do know, I think you guys went to a different tourniquet if I remember Kim showing me the tourniquet, but yeah, there's different tourniquets out there that people are using. And how do we get those patients from where they are in that hallway or that building to the collection point, and then from the collection point to the various triage areas and treatment areas? You can see here, you've got ambulances set up, you've got your 3 tarps, the red, the yellow, the green tarps, to be able to start bringing people to each one of the tarps. Secondary triage can start, treatment can start, and then your transportation officer can have already hopefully talked to the hospitals to determine where these patients are going to start going. Having these ambulances all set and ready to go to get the critical patients out, that we can hopefully go ahead and not delay their transport, get them to definitive care. Yeah, some of the ways people are carrying them, we gave you mega movers with the active shooter bags that we gave you guys earlier, different tarps that you guys use. People just picking people up. Some of them just by arms. Doesn't look very good, but it works. So when we talk about the rescue task force and what we're actually entailed, it all depends on what truly is going on with the incident. What is the incident? How many people do we expect to be involved? Is it an area of high population? Was it a busy time frame? But could you have just 2 patients completely, that's it, in a 2-story building? Or could you have 20 patients throughout a shopping mall? You know, how we're going to handle the situation really depends on what the story is. For rapid treatment, they'll send in 2 police officers, maybe 2 paramedics. What they're looking to do right there is just treat any life threats. When we start looking at patient movement, and I'll show you here just a couple slides that show you different movement patterns, but 3 officers and 3 to 4 paramedics, firefighter paramedics. They're trying to also, when you go through this, what is the safe way to get in the building and what is the safe way to get these patients out of the building? Get them to a collection point. So, for police, police provide security, going in and coming out. And you can see here, the medics are actually working on the individual, and you've got officers standing at all points, making sure that everyone is going to be safe. Here, they're extricating the patient. You've got 2 officers looking forward, and one off to the side and one looking behind them. It's really important that communication is done through your incident command so that they know how to go ahead and where people might be. So we initially start our triage. Everybody's familiar with that. When we start our initial triage, we get them outside, and then we're going to do a secondary triage. Some people that originally may have been triaged as a yellow may now move up to a red or have some type of movement that way. They're going to start doing any treatment. We start initial treatment, life-saving treatment initially when we get to them, but once they get up to the treatment area, there's other things. Reassessing interventions, checking that direct pressure, checking that pressure bandage, the tourniquet. Do we need to start IVs on these patients? Do they need other medications? Get them prepared for transport. Patient accountability. Now, we all use the smart triage tags. Actually, the state kind of went to that a couple of years ago. I think it was back in 2012. And some of you guys might realize there's little barcode scanners on them. In Region 10, they did not purchase the scanners for them, but Region 11 does have them. So if you ever get pulled down to the Chicago area where they're using triage tags, they're going to be scanning them as they go ahead and send them off for transport. We actually just use the little tags that are on the end of them to kind of write down, where did this patient go, which hospital, what service did they go by, so that we can have some general idea. I sent some information out at the beginning of the year too, and I think it was for American Red Cross. It's someone is uploading all the information of all these patients so that people can log on to see where their loved ones might be.
Sarah, is that barcode specific to that tag? Or is it a specific
Yes.
scanner?
It's a specific scanner that, of course, they made just for smart triage tags to be able to read. I don't know if any other scanner would work on them. But yeah, they, I guess it's pretty pricey too, from what I gather. Or originally were, that's why we didn't buy them in 2012. But I don't know of anybody in Region 10 that has purchased them. But if you guys are interested, I could let Martha know and find out. I'll see her this afternoon and find out exactly how much they cost.
Well, it's just funny because most of the EPCR programs out there these days have a scanning feature. So the one we have, we use iPads, and it doesn't work for the iPad yet, but it works on the Microsoft Surface where you can scan a driver's license. So I'm just wondering why they wouldn't make it universal. Even Wilmette's using ESO and it's got a scanning feature, or if someone's using Image Trend has a scanning feature, why they wouldn't just make that universal?
Huh.
Because if it has a scanning feature, it should be universal. Why would you have to buy a new? Anyway.
Why would you know? But that's a very good point. That would be something.
Similar to the hair packs and the buddy breathing, possibly. Right? Well, you know how they're compatible.
Yeah, that would be really nice
Organizations,
to-
but yet they do that.
Yeah, they don't
You know, you guys could probably, what my recommendation, if it didn't scan, because that scanner actually uploads it to the Start Triage website where it tells where patients are going. It's part of the tracking. It's EM something, EM tracking is what it's called. The website's called EM tracking. And I'll actually be able to give you more information when I start down at St. Joe's on November 1st, because I have to go through the training on it in the middle of October. So let me find out what I can find out about it, and I'll let you know. But yeah, wouldn't that be just nice if you could scan with your software?
Makes sense.
That would, yeah. So, when we're looking at the Rescue Task Force teams, the mission is to get 2 paramedics in with police, mainly to stop bleeding, assess the number of patients that are really injured, Determine what kind of information you're gonna need for those patients. You know, do you have to go ahead and bring in more people to help move them out? What is our collection point gonna be? When we bring these patients to the door or wherever, who's gonna be there to collect them? How are they gonna move them from the collection points to the triage mats? And then reporting this all back to Incident Command. Unified Command is gonna establish the rescue task force. It's gonna also get everybody the resources that is gonna be necessary to move these patients, and it'll be very helpful for getting them out sooner. So this is just one of the formats that they use, 3 officers, 3 paramedics to move the patients. You've got the 3 medics moving, and then you've got your officers making sure that everybody's safe. And here is again 3 paramedics, and then you have the 4 officers. And it really depends on the different, you know, what really is going on in the incident. How many shooters are there? Is there more than one? What resources of officers do they actually have for this? So, fire supervisor is going to manage patient care within the patient collection point. So, they're doing initial triage also. So, we've got all the patients, we're collecting them. Who needs further treatment? Does this person need to be transferred to definitive care now? Who goes first? They're going to direct the movements, and then they'll look at all the other different types of medical branches. Just make sure they have the proper supplies, make sure that they're getting the proper treatment for these patients. Now, this is our definitions. I'm just going to go to this one because this is a little bit easier to see. This currently is our mass casualty plan, our multi-patient plan. We have 4 major classifications here. We start off with the small incident. Small incident is, we're looking at using 3 to 6 ambulances. Now, when you're dealing with this, you're going to call your closest hospital, your closest trauma center for the incident to let them know what's going on. If you're right across the street from Evanston, yeah, call Evanston. Most of those patients will probably go right there. Some of them may end up being transferred to a further hospital. Give them an idea what's going on. I strongly suggest, if you know you're going out on one of these situations, that you have no idea how many patients you're going to start with, give the hospitals a heads up. Hey, St. Francis, hey, Evanston, we are going to a car accident with 5 cars. Looks like there's multiple patients. We'll let you know further. This will allow the hospitals to start making phone calls that they may need to make. They'll call the other area hospitals to see how many patients they may be able to take. Now, that generally doesn't happen in a small-scale incident if it turns out to be, but at least it's giving them a heads up. Maybe that they know that they've got, you know, just a simple surgery going on upstairs and to clear the ORs out for these patients. What are they going to need? What other resources are they going to need? Extra supplies brought upstairs. Field command coordinates transportation movement, and we don't use triage tanks in a small scale incident. It's just using our small, medium, and large classifications. You will call the hospitals that you're transporting to and let them know that you're on your way, and you are going to complete a patient care report. Now, in a small scale incident, we break down, instead of red, yellow, and green patients, we use category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1, this is our bad patient. This is, they have a systolic blood pressure less than 90 2 times. Maybe they have specific injuries, 2 long bone fractures, pelvis fractures, depressed skull fracture, paralysis. Those are some of the ones that are in here. Flail chest, yeah. Amputation is another one. These patients go to the highest level trauma center within 25 minutes. For you guys, this is a question you always get wrong on a quiz. Because for your answer, I go to the closest trauma center because you have 2 level 1 trauma centers. But the answer for that question should always be the highest level trauma center within 25 minutes. Category 2, this is all based on mechanism of injury. Maybe you have the driver dies in a car. The passenger is out walking around when you get there. He doesn't have a scratch on him. but he decides he should be going and be checked out. That would be a category 2 patient. Someone getting hit by a car, pedestrian versus auto. Let's see, extrication greater than 20 minutes. Some of the things that you guys had a lot of questions on when we first started doing it was someone has a head injury and they're on aspirin, not just anticoagulants, but aspirin or antiplatelets. We are calling those a trauma in our hospital, and it's been interesting because we just had our trauma meeting yesterday. The number of patients with bleeds from just simple head injuries. Someone falls, they bonk their head on the floor, and a lot of them are coming up with bleeds. We're hoping at the end of the year to be able to put all this data together. And actually, I want to share it with you guys just to say, you know, we think, oh, grandma fell out of the wheelchair, she hit her head on the floor, you know, she's fine, she's talking good, she's making sense, but she ends up having a small bleed. So we'll share that information with you. Category 2 patients, they go to the closest trauma center. They go to the closest trauma center. And then we have category 3 patients. Simple trauma. Kid fell off his bike, broke his wrist. Or kid's playing soccer, has a, you know, sprained ankle, something to that degree. They can really go to any hospital. Now, with this, there are some exceptions. You have a traumatic arrest. Traumatic arrests go to the closest trauma center. Maybe you can't get an airway on a patient. That patient would go to the closest emergency department. Doesn't have to be a trauma center. We just need to get an airway in that patient. So these are pretty standard. We're working on doing a revision right now of the protocols, and these are basically set forth by the CDC. We didn't see any really major changes on this. So. Medium scaled incidences, 7 to 10 ambulances. Here you're going to contact your resource hospital. Actually, I'm going to kind of do medium and large together. So medium is 7 to 10, large is more than 10. Both of these, you're going to contact your resource hospital. But understand one thing, your resource hospital may say, hey, we're involved in this, we've got a lot going on here. We have now kicked communication to our pod hospital. And our pod hospital is going to be Highland Park. They are the ones that kind of oversee all of the mass casualty information. So you may be responding to them, and then Highland Park will disperse the information to all the area hospitals. Give them an idea of what might be going on. You know, bleachers collapsed at the Northwestern game on Friday. You know, it looks like we might have 40 to 50 patients. We're going to use triage tanks for medium and large scale incidences. And when you're transporting these patients, you don't call the hospital directly. They already know that they're getting so many reds, so many yellows, and so many greens. The difference between these two is that with the medium scale, you will do a patient care report. With the large scale, you will not do a patient care report. Also remember, in the policy and the plan, with a small, medium, or large scale incident, there is an after action report that answers like about 5 or 6 questions that needs to be sent off to me after every one of these incidences. Then we have the last category is evacuation of a healthcare facility. Here we do something we call reverse triage, and this is just getting the patients out of the facility. Remember, when we get on scene and we say, anybody who can walk, go over there. Those are our green patients. And then we have the reds and the yellows left to deal with. With a healthcare, we can send one firefighter paramedic in, and they can escort out a bunch of patients. Remember, triage is doing the most amount of good for the most amount of patients with the limited resources that you have. The last patients that are going to come out of a facility are going to be the ones that need a lot of resource. Maybe you have someone who's a bariatric patient. Maybe you have someone who's on a ventilator, and now you have to disconnect that vent. You have to ventilate them while moving them in a bed. Once we're outside, yes, the reds are going to go first, then the yellows and the green. But we use reverse triage to extricate them from the building. Again, triage tags are going to be used. No contact between the transport ambulance and the hospital. In the event of an evacuation of a healthcare or even a large-scale incident, don't forget about the private ambulances that you guys have available to you. There's, it's called Peppers or Chuck, I think is the two groups. But that's kind of like their Mavis division. So if you need to have 20 extra transporting ambulances, you can call this number, and this number will then coordinate to drop all the ambulances. Some of you guys might remember, I think it was 2005 or right around there, when the plane hit the cancer treatment center in Zion. Superior Ambulance was able to drop 50 ambulances within an hour up in that area to help start transporting those patients. So they can go ahead and get you as many ambulances for transporting that you may need. So that is it. So you want to stop that? Now, I've even got better news for you.